Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. How are you doing? I see Moy, I see Marva, I see Michael, I see Miss, of course, our executive director herself, Miss Fran DeSalle. I see, of course, our VP of the BBPA, Ross Kadas. I see Mac McNaught McLean. Welcome, everybody. Welcome today. Welcome today. And a pleasant afternoon to you all. From our visitors and longtime members, it's always good to see you. We appreciate you coming today and invite you to sit back and participate as we learn and share in today's discussion. But before we begin, let's take a moment to view our land acknowledgement video.
As we gather together here as family and friends, we acknowledge this sacred land on which we reside. It has been the site of human activity for 15,000 years. This land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, this place is still the home of many indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. We are also mindful of the broken covenants and the need to strive to make right with our relations. We also acknowledge people of African descent who were brought here against their will or in search of a safe place to live their lives and raise their children. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Again, we'd like to say welcome to everyone that's here thus far. We tend to have people coming through, so we welcome. And welcome to today. It's Ask a Professional series. It's brought to you by the Black Business Professional Association, also known as the BBPA. Today's program is one of many programs brought to you by the BBPA as we seek to understand, respond, and provide services, resources, and support for our community. I'm your host, Anton James. I'm a marketing and strategy consultant and an event host and moderator. This program is Ask Professionals, and it's an interactive discussion-based series where we come together and discuss topics and issues affecting our community. Topics have ranged from improving yourself, your business, your family, issues in industry, in mental health, shadeism, Black hair, celebrations of award winners and historic and past and current community leaders. Regardless of the topic, the goal is the same: to provide an inviting platform where we as a community can come together and have candid conversations on issues that matter to us. So with that said, let's get into today's topic. Today, we'll be having a discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion. But before we get started, I would like to invite the VP of the BBPA, Mr. Ross Kadas, to come and give some greetings on behalf of the BBPA and a few words. Mr. Ross Kadas.
Thanks, Anton. Welcome everybody to this, yet again, another important series in Ask a Professional. Allison, thank you so much for joining us today. Particularly important is we're going to talk about diversity and inclusion, and for us as a community, as a Black community, it is an important topic, and it's just not a topic that is the order of the day. It is a topic that that we need to continue to talk about as a Black community. I sit on a diversity group for my industry, in the staffing industry, and some of the things we talk about is, you know, the middle layer in any organization really determines the culture of that organization. And if that middle layer, that middle management piece, it doesn't look like us, the challenge of the culture looking like that manager is kind of where we sit. So, you know, this is an important topic that we need to continue to talk about. We need to continue to talk about in the workplace, in our businesses, in our churches, and everywhere we go. And being educated and understanding the challenges with it is important to us as a community. So, Allison, I thank you again for for coming to be part of this dialogue and this conversation. And I hope we will take some good insights from it that we can continue to build in our community. Thank you, Anton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ross, for that greetings. Now, let's meet our special guest for today. This is Allison Hector Alexander. So who is Miss Allison Hector Alexander? She's an equity and inclusion specialist with over 15 years experience creating leading policies, education, and training in anti-racism, anti-oppression, and allyship and equity. She's the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion with the regional municipality of Durham and works from a feminist, anti-racist, and anti-oppressive framework. In 2018, Allison co-presented at the Black Portrait Conference at Harvard University on critical race theory, specifically anti-Black racism. Allison has been recognized with a Champion Award by PLFLAG Canada, Durham region for her work in creating inclusive spaces through her work in all areas of diversity. The region of Durham has recognized her with Diversity Champion Award in 2019 and was awarded the Mediba Award. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce formally Allison Hector Alexander.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I know, it's our pleasure. I'm really looking forward to having this discussion. So let's jump right into it. In this climate today, everyone's hearing a lot of things. And everyone's hearing equity, diversity, inclusion. And many think that terms are actually interchangeable. So the first is I'm gonna ask you, let's at least put the platform out there. Tell us what each term means and how they're different.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of conflating of the terms because we hear IDE, DEI, EDI. It's a sexy term, right? It is the sexy term. It is what we're hearing all around us. And really, it's important that we don't conflate the two because we've talked a lot about diversity and sort of heaped everything into that one word. And really, when we're talking about diversity, it is who's in the room, who's present, the visibility, the social identities. We need to take diversity with not just seeing who's here and who's present and the diversity of thoughts and the diversity of experience. We also have to look at how are the spaces being built and the practices are being built so that people can bring their whole selves to the space. And that is where we're talking about inclusion. And so, yes, I'm here, but do I feel safe bringing my whole self? And then taking another step further to say, how safe am I? How are the practices inclusionary? Do I see myself reflected there? Do I have an opportunity to have a voice into how these policies and practices will look and the actions will look? And then taking it further to, okay, I'm invited, I am here, I'm sitting at the table, but is my voice being accepted? Is my voice of value? Is my voice celebrated? And so that is the difference. So the equity piece is looking at what is created, what is harmful, what is exclusionary. And then, I want to say, let's take it one step further outside of DEI to creating spaces of belonging. So let's disrupt and dismantle what is existing that is harmful to us, and let's co-create it. Let's develop again the existing system that are not necessarily beneficial or were not necessarily built with us in mind.
Perfect. Well, with that, let's piggyback on that a bit. Share with us some of the challenges and the fallacies about some of these terms or traditional views on EDI.
So as I mentioned earlier, diversity, a lot, 10, 20 years ago, there's a lot of conversation about, getting people of different social identities. So let's get Black folks in there. Let's get, people, with different disabilities. Let's get, gender identity folks in. Let's just get people in there and then you're there. But when you're there, how are you having an impact on the systems that are existing? I can be there, but if I don't have power, if I'm not in a position to effect real change, then that doesn't really mean anything. That doesn't, create path and opportunities for those, other people who look like me. It doesn't create opportunities for others generally who've been marginalized or excluded, historically. And so that is the important piece that we need to look at, in that our focus isn't only on who's there, but our focus is around who is sitting at the table and who has a voice to impact real change. And this is where we need to move to also looking at what are the existing systems and who does it leave out? Whose voice is reflected in the system? Who is feeling safe enough to bring their entire self? So I can walk down the hallway and I can laugh as loud as I want, and security is not going to think that something's happening, because that is all of who I am. The fact that one of my identities is that I'm a parent and I'm a mother. And so if I walk into the space, I need to feel comfortable enough to say, I'm a mother and I have littles. And then you know what? The reality of working from home is that one of them might just bust in through the door at any time. These are the things that we need to look at. How safe is it that I can have a conversation with my supervisor to say, here's what happened to me. Here's what a colleague said to me. And I think that this is racist, or I think it's a microaggression, and this is how it's been happening, so that I can feel safe enough having that conversation without feeling that it's going to turn around and make me, the one with the problem. So this is where we need to drill down a lot, as opposed to throwing out EDI diversity and we're so diverse, but is it safe? Is it supportive of my well-being? Is it a space that I can bring my whole self without having to compartmentalize or leave pieces of myself in my car because it's not conducive, to my social identity and my social location?
I think you're bringing up some great points, and you actually brought something up there that I want to comment on, because at one point, it was viewed that, people were afraid, and even though they saw and heard things, they didn't want to bring to the forefront. Can you give some experience of how it's changing? Is it that COVID is really expediting? Is it the George Floyd area, or is it just policy? How is it changing from traditional to now?
I think there's a sense of empowerment. Now, mind you, there's still that sense of, am I safe enough to come forward to say, this is how the system, is impacting me? So there's still that. But I also feel that we're in a space right now where people feel a bit more empowered. We're talking more, we're articulating more what our experiences are. And I think that is important. And of course, we cannot minimize the impact of, the murder of George Floyd on our voices and being heard. So it's important that we look at how we balance these two pieces, right? That yes, we're talking more. Yes, that it's sexy to talk about anti-Black racism now, but we've been living anti-Black racism, for as long as we've been navigating and existing in these Black bodies. So this isn't new, but we are talking more. Organizations are creating anti-Black racism policies and strategies and pillars and frameworks and all of the good stuff, right? Good stuff. But for the better pieces is that, looking at how we will action and operationalize all this good stuff. So I think we're finding voice. We're creating spaces for us to have these conversations like this platform here with you and your organization today. But also, acknowledging that it's still not as safe for folks to come forward. And that is because that there is this idea, when people say to me, there are a few things that come to mind. People have said to me that slavery didn't exist in Canada. Our Canadian economy, our Canadian business system is built on the economics of slavery. So let's just get that straight. Absolutely. This is where, there was a business case made for slavery. There is a business case for, having my ancestors and our ancestors in the fields for, many, many hours because, race wasn't a social construct. They didn't see race as, so race was connected to biology. And I'm sure you probably know some of that. So we have to look at that. Then we also have to look at the structural systems that we have in place. Take a look at our Supreme Court. Do you see anybody that looks like me? Take a look at the people who have legislative power to make decisions for real change. They don't necessarily look like us. So all of those pieces we have to take a look at as to why it's still not very safe to talk about our experiences of racism, because there's a fear here where we talk about that experience that people start to feel off kilter, because then there's a threat. There's a threat that, you know, they might lose some privilege. Right. And so this is the context we have to look at it. We definitely have to look at it within those contexts.
You know what? I'm loving where you're going, because that's the actual truth. The truth you're told is many people believe that things are very surface, but, you know, we've got here because of systems. We got here because of process, and to not acknowledge the systems that took us here and think that a program, a single program, or a single action is going to change it is somewhat, at best, I'll just say error. Let's talk about that. You know, right now, what we have seen historically, change is happening in terms of what was once considered an old boys club. Where have we seen the biggest gains made in terms of progress, in terms of whether it's diversity on gender or race? Have we seen any movement? Has society shown that it can change, it can make differences?
It can. I think it can. I know that there's a resistance, and we have to acknowledge that resistance, but we also have to acknowledge and celebrate the movement that has happened. And so, you know, is it where I think we should be? Absolutely not. Are we moving the needle slowly? Yes. Can we go quicker? Yes. And that's just me and my personal impatience speaking, right? And so I recognize that, but I also recognize that these are deeply rooted issues. Very deeply rooted. You have, you know, when we're looking at a review of a system, or we're looking at a review of policy, we have to go back to who created it, who was at the table, you know, who was top of mind, whose experience was being validated, you know, who was missing, who wasn't invited, who did not even, you know, would not even recognize as human enough to be sitting at that table. So we have to look at how historical and deeply entrenched and ingrained these systems are. And then we have to look at how do we chip away at it? So where do we start? And I always say, you know, when we think about, from me and my understanding, when I think about racism, or I think about any sort of form of oppression, you know, I think about the structural piece. I think about, you know, the legislation. I think about the laws. I think about those business cases that were made. And I think about how that informs our systems, how that informs, you know, the policies that are in place, how that informs, you know, the economic systems, the structures, how that informs access, you know, to certain spaces, education, those core things, right? We look at that because it's those systems that embolden racists, ableists. You know, these are the systems, because it reinforces people to feel emboldened and empowered. So we have to chip away at it, and we chip away where we can. We chip away at, you know, we hold our government accountable. You know, this is not a sexy hot.
I want to stop from there, because you know, because it's really important what you're actually saying, because most people think it's only surface level, and I really want to dig deep. Before we do, because I'm about to shift, but I just want to give a quick moment there. For those that have joined a little bit late, we are speaking to Allison Hector Alexander. She is the director for the region of Durham. And we're talking today about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we were just giving some context into what we're actually looking. So when we're talking about those functions, equity, diversity, and inclusion, what it took to get us here from a systemic perspective, and what's going to take to get us through here. Not just in the workplace, but in the mindset place and in the family structure place. So for those, and now to reset, for those that may have a question, you're going to look at the bottom of your screen. There's going to be a participation section there. You can either type questions in the chat, or you can raise your hands. Now, let's jump back into this, because you know what? You're hitting some very, very key points that oftentimes people don't look at. The truth be told, you're correct. It is systemic, it's a systemic problem. So what can we do to ensure, and let's talk about that specifically now, to counteract, if systemic process got us here, what systemic process can we develop to take us out, or at least to try to counteract this damage and ensure it doesn't return after this political agenda changes, or anti-Black sentiment, it dies down, or some change? What can we do to, in turn, ensure strategic growth?
And that is, you know, that word, Anton, strategic. We have to be strategic, right? You need to have these conversations, because I think it's important that, you know, even in doing this work, like if you were to ask me 10 years ago, in the education, I come from the education world. And so in higher education, I focus a lot on the interpersonal and individual ways that, you know, oppression or ism showed up. And then you take a look at, you know, the more that I saw Black bodies being killed or having violence perpetrated, or, you know, policing systems and carding and all of those pieces. And it was like, what is emboldening people to do that? And it is the system that's emboldening people to do those pieces, because people feel that either the biases are deeply ingrained and rooted, or that they feel that they have the power to perpetrate violence or to exclude us, or any of those other forms in terms of how racism shows up. So I think from a systemic lens, we have to understand how it impacts us, but also how it impacts our community as a whole. Large community. And then we have to harness, and I say harness, but we have to harness our power as a Black community, our voting power, holding our government officials accountable, you know, not only at election time, but really holding them accountable.
I want you to be clear, just for clarity, when you say hold election officials accountable to what? Because oftentimes we as a people, we hold to traditional parties. What do you mean specifically?
What it means. And so I have a couple ideas of what that means, and some people might disagree with me. You know, one of the things that I noticed during at every election is that as a community, as a Black community, I see social media, I have friends who speak with me and they say, well, you know, that's how my mom voted. That's how my granny voted. My granny came here, you know, in the 60s, in the 70s, and this is how, you know, this is who supported the community. And so we're sticking to it. Is this still benefiting us? So this is where we need to have some difficult conversation with each other and unpack how have these you know, policies and legislative directives, how have that benefited our community? And so when I say hold them accountable, where are the resources being allocated to? What does that look like? How are we jumping through hoops to be able to access funding that benefits our community? These are the questions that we have to ask. And not only when election is coming up, right after election, this is what you said you're going to do. As an association and as an organization, how are we advocating for the community to say, you said you're going to do this, then I'm gonna be in your inbox every month asking you to follow up on what you said you were going to promise, and not forgetting that, so that when 4 years, you know, come around, what are we going to do with our vote? Because there's power in our votes. There's power in our spending, you know, capacity, and that it's not a one blackout day. Whatever we're doing as a community, it has to be sustainable. It cannot be that I black out my social media and I'm sitting on my chair in my comfy space, right? How are we mobilizing as a community to say this is what we need, but how are we building capacity and leveraging what we have? So if I leverage what my background is, how do I use that in the community? How am I volunteering? How am I giving back? And how am I having those difficult conversations within my household, with my family, so that they understand, listen, this policy or this lack of policy here, this is how it might impact you down the road, whether it be education, whether it be old age pension, whether it be healthcare, whether it be, you know, community resources, these things, how could that impact you down the road? So let's simplify this, right? And have the conversation with each other so that we understand the value of building capacity within our community. And when I say that too, it's also important too that as a community, we remember and we recognize the diversity within the Black community. That is also important, because even within the community, sometimes, and you mentioned, you know, at the very beginning, some of the topics that you've explored around colorism, you know, around, you know, it might be LGBTQ plus issues. There is diversity within our community. And then the other thing I want us from a systemic place, and I think, you know, historically that has kept us, you know, in a place where I think for many of us, where it's sort of like, this is how it's always been. No, it doesn't matter that this is how it's always been. Our existence didn't start with slavery. You know, our existence isn't only around the trauma of exclusion. I'm thinking of just on this call, the level of excellence, the level of success that is there. And so how do we leverage that? And this is how we will start to chip away at the systemic pieces, is using our voice and using our power, whether it be, you know, educational, experience-based, community development-based, to continue to build our community.
That's absolutely fabulous. You know what? Because you've said a lot of key things, and part of what you're saying there, it's really changing mindsets, developing actionable items for each person, from a family structure, from a society structure, from a politics structure, holding people accountable. Mm-hmm. All those are key fundamentals. And I think you've set a fabulous framework of how we as a people have got to, take advantage of where we are right now. Let's pivot a bit. Let's pivot into the workforce now. Mm-hmm. And we talk about EDI specifically in the framework of what you just mentioned there. How is EDI being implemented today, and how does that account for or help bolster mm-hmm. the accountability portion, understanding the historic portion, understanding specific needs of the Black community?
Right. So I think, many organizations, many companies have policies, right? Like I think the majority of whether medium-sized companies will have policies, anti-racism, harassment and discrimination policies, their policies. And so some of them stop with the policy, and that there isn't a program or a procedure document that goes with that says, this is how we're going to action this, and this is how we're going to operationalize this. And so how are we asking these questions, when we're our team meetings with our supervisors to say, what does that look like, right? How are resources being allocated, right? You have, Pride Month is celebrated in June, Indigenous National Day in June, we do Black History Month, in February, but how are those resources being allocated in recognition of celebration year-round, in recognition of, recognizing Black excellence year-round? And so these are the things that we need to ask. The other piece too that I recommend this, where, I've had folks who disagree with me and they say, well, I can't do this on the side of my desk. And I agree that you shouldn't have to, but we have to start somewhere. And so if we can organize as a group.
I'll stop you there because I want to get there. I just want to establish. See, yes. What the challenge is right now, if you work for a very large organization, there's oftentimes, there may be some resource for EDI. Yeah. But for medium, small, and start, oftentimes there's none. Mm-hmm. So how do we, as whether we're an employer or employee, how is it now implemented? How should it be implemented?
Mm-hmm. First of all, it should be in the strategic plan. It should be in your core, guide framework that says this is how you're going to do your business. It's not to be sort of, again, as I said, off the side of your desk or sprinkled here, and there, and that we're just going to do that when we recognize that. No, it should be woven into your strategic plan, and it should guide the business. Whether we're looking at how you apply an equity lens to your communication piece, your supplier, vendor, way that you do business with them, are they diverse? What does that diversity mean to them? Whether it be with your, your EAP program, how is there a trauma-informed capacity within that? So these are the things that we have to look at across the board. And so that is how, so to answer the question around, how are organizations, or how should organizations do this? It should be for a very, very core part of how the leadership approaches that, because then that will trickle down to everyone else. So it has to be that really guiding principle document that says, this is how we're going to do our work. And EDI, diversity, DEI, is woven into every aspect of it, because then that will guide what resources are allocated, that will guide the training opportunities, that will guide, some of those pieces where people feel comfortable having these conversations. There will be that agenda that is driven by the leadership, right? That will come from the top, that will look at what recognition pieces that we do so that I see myself being celebrated within the organization. That will guide how, concerns or complaints of discrimination and harassment are dealt with, and that they're not dismissed as conflict, or that they're not dismissed at, oh, don't worry, go figure it out with your colleague. When we talk about microaggression, where are the dedicated resources that says, we need these specific divisions and units because there's a special expertise that is needed to understand what the threshold for racism or what the behavior that is happening, that it is in fact racism, that it is in fact, this is microaggressive behavior. And I don't even like the word microaggression because the trauma of it is nothing but there's no micro nothing about it. But when someone is questioning whether you really belong, or, you know, if I'm sitting around a table and I've shared something that I'm passionate about, am I the angry Black woman, or am I the immigrant of the accent that people are trying to, you know, give off, that they don't understand what I've just said? You understand what I've said, you don't want to hear it, you're resisting it, right? So when I'm explaining that, whoever I'm having that conversation with, one has to understand how these, you know, racism acts or microaggression, how they show up. And if you don't understand, you have to want to understand. You have to be intentional in wanting to understand so that you can do better now that you know better. But if that culture doesn't exist, if that leadership doesn't exist, then really we're sitting with a policy that we've just checked, right?
You brought some hot pieces of knowledge. The one thing I love that you actually said, you know, actually, I see it right there. Fran, the executive director, just said the same thing.
Yeah.
Microaggression is not micro at all. It's absolutely great. But so let me ask you here, because here's part of the challenge. Well, let me ask the question. There was a question that was brought to you about by Ariel. It says this: Allison, is there a DEI training you'd recommend for employers?
Employers, yes. So, you know, and I'm sure that there are folks online who do you know, those pieces, but employers need to start from the very basics 101. You need to understand what your social identity is. Because if I know my social identity, then I understand the way that I've experienced oppression. And I also understand the way that I've enjoyed privilege. And if I'm mindful of that, then I understand how I use my privilege to be an ally. And I also understand how I use, for lack of a better word, my experiences of oppression to push for change. So we have to recognize those pieces. So very introductory pieces. What is racism? That racism even existed. I did a session with a group of leaders a couple of years ago who was sitting there and they said, oh my God, I never knew slavery existed in Canada. You know, I have colleagues who will write on their stories on their LinkedIn profiles who will say, you know, and I just don't get it. Like, why are they talking about systemic racism? That doesn't exist. These are racialized people who are saying that. Racialized people who are saying systemic, you know, racism doesn't exist. And the sad piece about that is that these are some people who are in leadership positions. Wow. And this is where, when we talk about diversity, we cannot only rely on who's there. But there's a Black person here. There's one Black person here. What are they doing? How are they creating opportunities and paths for others to be where they are as well? That is important too for our community.
You are dropping nuggets. I wouldn't even say nuggets. We'll call it wheelbarrows of knowledge. I do want to respond to one, but I'm telling you, I have someone that's even wiser than myself. Mr. Michael Pinnock, he's raised his hand. He's always dropping a share of insight as well. Please, by all means, Mr. Michael.
Thank you, Anton. I was just watching the time, and I didn't want to wait for 5 minutes before we close. I get a chance to say something to Allison and have her respond to it, because, you know, I suppose we're from the same quote unquote old school. You know, we grew up in a time when we spend a lot of time understanding history and so on and so forth. And as I sit here and I listen to you, there's a few things I'd like to see, and, you know, so you'd have an opportunity to respond before and until we run out of time. Mm. You know, so I recall in 1776, when the US did their constitution, they said, we the people. And the people then was Caucasian, male, able, straight. But, you know, that was we the people. And as they, you know, go forward to surrender, there's, you know, the human rights stuff, and they put, you know, rights in there, and they try to adjust it so it reflects the disabled and the, you know, the different genders and that sort of stuff. And, you know, as you speak about understanding the basic 101 and the fundamentals, and I just think about what we're trying to do in the BBP, you know, how we're trying to dovetail different programs. Yeah. Because back in the 70s, there was a lot of ism flying around. There was communism and socialism and capitalism and totalitarianism and fascism. And people spent a lot of time understanding what those things meant, because those were the business cases used by the ruling class to decide what happened. The system we're under right now is not broken. When I talk to my people, I want them to understand that. The system is doing exactly what it's designed to do.
That's correct.
We have to understand that it's not for us in a forum like this to educate, in a forum to talk about knowing the fundamental of economics, marketing, finance, accounting, because that is one of the ways we're going to use to break the chain. Because the system is not broken. How the cops deal with us, how the courts deal with us, how the school system deals with us is exactly the business case that they put forward. And if you do history, and I like to tell folks, history is a good thing. Go back to feudalism before capitalism. Go back to slavery before. And remember, we also say to our folks now, we weren't slaves. We were enslaved.
Yes.
We're always people. We're not slaves, like we were enslaved. And the system of shackle slavery has changed. It went through feudalism, and that has changed. And we're now in what they call the free market. But each one of these have business cases to support those who are in privilege. And as you're right to say, even amongst our own people, Harriet Tubman said she could have saved more people if they just realized that they were enslaved. You know? And that's why I say all of this to, just to reinforce like some of the things we're trying to do, because we've been talking a lot and we have a lot of conversations and we still need to have them, but we're trying in the BBP to pivot from those conversations into implementation and delivery. And so one of the things I like when you raise here is how can we, in our space, and that is becoming a new, I don't know what you call it. Space is now a new thing. I don't know what it means, but it means this is my little world. And I'm just trying to say to folks, we can't lock ourselves in our own little world, We have to break out of that, because that is also part of the business plan. Keep them in their little world, let them feel comfortable. Then you have a Mike Pinnacle, is a token, comes out, but rather than he goes back and help, he's now on the outside, as you see, even marginalized and racialized people see, oh, we didn't have slavery. But these things are still happening. Some of the stuff you mentioned that people don't feel comfortable in their own space because they may be, listen, we have got stories right now, and it's not a threat, it is real.
Yes.
Not a threat. You talk about how uncomfortable you feel about something, and before you know that, you get a golden parachute. If you're lucky. If not, you just get kicked out and you have to go to the courts to try to help you. So, I'm just saying I'm very happy when we have this heart to professional, and a professional comes in this time to say, this is what is happening now, and this is what we need to do. But our people have to realize that the system is not broken.
Yeah.
We will break the system, but it's not broken because it's doing what it's supposed to do. And, I'm just pleased that you are able to come, and I say, oh, all you're seeing is just dovetailing in all the other things that we're trying to do, and this fundamental, we're switching now to teaching our people. It's not enough just to know the tricks of the trade. That is what got us through slavery and the hustling, and as we do things. We have reached a stage now where we have to learn the trade itself.
Yes.
We have to know what economics is, what marketing is, what finance is, what accounting is. Not just, oh, you give somebody money, you get it back. And, people using the word like leverage in finance. We have to know what it really means. Because we've been doing partners back then, where you throw a hand and you get a draw. Yeah. But we never call it leverage. We use other people's money to do things we want. So I'm just saying, it's, I love how you, Anton, talk about the nuggets. I had to come on. Normally I wait for the hand, but I just had to come on because this is where we're at. We talk and then we try to make changes and we do them incrementally. And we have a lot of challenge in our own community, just convincing our own people Just want to go back to Harriet Tubman again. If they realized that they were enslaved, more people could have been saved on the Underground Railroad.
Mm-hmm. No,
but
absolutely.
Folks didn't want to leave because they thought this is all they knew, and nothing can be better than or worse than where they're at. You know, so thanks again for coming, and keep doing the good work.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure. And everything that you said, you know, that how are we going to expand capacity? How are we looking at it? Like, you know, I will tell you that when I think about how do I give back to my community, when I think about how do I engage with the community, you know, I don't see it as, you know, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm seeing it as I do it because it is my responsibility. You know, my responsibility, if I'm in a position of leadership, how do I use the resources and the reach and the quote unquote power that I may have temporarily to make life better for my community? And if that is about, you know, allocating resources, then that is what I will do. If that is about having these conversations so that we can say, hey, you know, I can connect you to this person. We need that. We need to be able to look at as a community, how are we going to and I'm going to use the word leverage. How am I going to leverage where I am right now, you know, to support someone with a recommendation letter, to support someone to say, hey, you know, so-and-so is hiring, to support someone to say, you need experience, come, I can connect you with someone who you can do an information interview with them. You might be able to get an internship. You might be able to get, you know, a volunteer opportunity. Here are the scholarships that are, like, we have a responsibility to do that. And I also think too, and I'm going to stop, Anton, I know I'm watching time too. And I also think that we can exist in both spaces. We need space like this for us to be able to really unpack the experiences and the frustrations and the celebration and the joy. We need to be able to do that in this. And I don't call it a safe space, I call it a brave space, right? Because we know that our existence, by the mere fact of being in Black bodies, we have to be brave every single day. So we need these spaces. But then I also get it where we also have to be in the other spaces, because that is where we're going to make change. And we step into the other spaces, and sometimes we take risks being in the other spaces and speaking up. But when we find ourselves in a particular place in our careers, you know, we feel a bit more comfortable doing that. And when we can do that, then we look at how we support those who are not as safe and who are not as able to take risks. How do we support you?
You know, I think you're bringing, wow, you both brought such phenomenal points. And I think why it's so important is this is the space for us to do that. This is the space as a professional where we as a community can come together and actually educate each other and actually disseminate. When we were talking about W.E. Du Bois said, the talented 10 should reach back and to help those that below us. So let's look at that. Let's look how it's implemented, because sometimes things are implemented or said in theory or said in practice, but without actual steps. How do we actually implement? How do we actually implement this with teeth to it? And more specifically, you know, historically, I've worked in Canada, US, and Europe, and historically, programs such as EDI, when they're touting, we have numbers, you know, they'll say number-based strategy. We have X amount of, they'll say usually minorities, but let's say they say Blacks, whatever that however they identify that. But those ones are represented by the part-time workers, the janitors, and there's nothing wrong with janitors and administrative support. How do we ensure that we get that there's representation at all levels, in management and at even the executive level? And it's a two-part question. Once we get them there, how do we ensure they're not tokenized, such that you see that they're actually put in there and either they have the mentality of the status quo and that they do nothing to change their culture or the complexity of their, or the composition of their teams around them? How do we, A, get them there, and two, ensure from a measurement perspective that the culture and composition changes to reflect the diversity? Short and long.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So to start, so the first part is that it is important that when we're in positions that we can influence, you know, hiring practices, again, you know, how are we advocating on our behalf? So I will say, you know, my role, you know, as the director of diversity, I report directly into the CAO, and the CAO reports into council. So as a community, as residents, there is an opportunity for advocacy at the council level. Anybody can ask for a delegation to go to council. Anybody can bring in a recommendation to say, I want you to consider this. And so if you are in a position to effect change, looking at the hiring policies and practices, right? Where do you post? What are your screening systems looking like? You know, how are we supporting folks who might need support with their resumes on interview prep? You know, and again, taking a look at the diversity of where, not who's here, only who's there, but where, within what roles. And you mentioned that, you know, if there's a core group of racialized folks, of Black folks in environmental systems, why is it that this is where folks are? And this is the cleaning services, this is landscaping, those sort of things. And why is that? But then the other thing too is that how do we wrap around the junior leaders? How do we wrap around the folks who are coming out of university and wanting to go into leadership position? How about folks who are in middle management who are looking to go into leadership position? One of the things that I've seen and I see a gap existing within our community is a formalized approach to mentorship and leadership development. That is something we need to look at. I wish I had more time in the day, because I'm more than happy to sit and write a proposal for money to create a formalized mentorship program. We don't reach out to each other to say, I want to talk about this. I am worried about this. How do I approach this? I am the only one, or there are only two of us. Can I hear from you about your experience and how you've done this? One, we need to normalize reaching out and asking for help from our community leaders, but our community leaders also need to normalize wrapping around us, and I say us as a young leader, right? Relatively young, but as our young leaders, how do we wrap around as a community? We have to look at how we do that, because for those folks who are in these positions, who might not be in a place in their career where they feel safe enough to speak out and say, this is wrong, right? You know, for folks who are in a position where, you know, as the only one, not comfortable, or probably just figure, you know what, that's not my responsibility. I don't have to create path or look to pull anybody up. So how do you say, hey, what are you doing? It doesn't have to be in any sort of, you know, confrontational, in the most respectful way. How are you supporting your community? What does that look like for you, right? So the mentoring piece is huge. The other piece is that, you know, holding, again, I go back to holding our, you know, council, our politicians, or representative leaders. How do we do our hiring? What does that look like, right? What is the screening like? Where are these positions posted? And what is our recruitment process like? Who sits on these hiring committees? Right? What does that look like? So these things we have to ask these questions. We have to take a look at the existing policies, because a lot of them are public policies. I will take a look at that to see, when we're doing appointments, what language is being used. And that is the equitable lens that I ask people to take a look at, in that, you know, one, and Mr. Pinnock mentioned that, who are the ones creating, you know, the people who are creating the systems, right? They don't necessarily look like us. They were created a
second here, because you're absolutely correct. But I just want to pivot this a little bit, because you're absolutely right in the culture. But how does someone do that in the workplace? Because right now we have a lot that's in the workplace, and they recognize challenges. They don't have EDI departments, they don't have EDI resources, and they've seen discrimination or challenges. How do they counteract, or what can they do if they don't know what to do?
Mobilize. So you know that there's somebody that you trust, and that there's somebody who aligns with your level of thinking of taking action. So mobilize. So that means create your own, you know, Alliance of Black committee, create your own, EDI committee. You start small with the 3 or 4 people that you have, and you say to your management, we need resources, we need time, recognize, for us to be able to do this work, because this is necessary work. This is work right now. I mean, and if we're going to take advantage on the opportunity of the timeliness of all of it, I don't know of any supervisor or manager in their right mind who are going to say, no, we're not going to allow you to do this. So this is the opportune time. Jump on it. The iron is hot. Let us strike right now. Create our own committees, create our own, sub-working groups, whatever that looks like. And once I say, take that, and I'm going to use that word again, leverage, show the management, this is necessary, this is required. Here are the activities that we've done. You need to build that capacity now, and you need to allocate the resources to have dedicated, you know, DEI specialists, DEI division, whatever that looks like. We know in our society, when it comes to those issues, it's very reactive. So George Floyd happened. And so now all of this is present and all of this is sexy. And so we jump on it now. So this is an opportune time to be able to say, okay, we're creating this committee. We cannot do it on the side of our desk. So now how do you know, as an organization, build your capacity, you know, to be sure at the end of the day, and you tie DEI back to the wellness of your employees.
Perfect.
Right?
Let's take it one step further, because we want to talk about not only how do we progress forward, but we want to address those that are going through right now. You know, right now, there are many, we have about 10 minutes left. There are many that are going there that may be the victim of challenges within the community. You talk about, you know, building alliances, but what is someone's recourse if they've seen challenges and it's been normalized, you know, to them, you know, they have harder reviews, they have more work put on them. What are their recourses in order to change? Because someone said, Lucia said, and it's actually true, those in power will never truly give up the power. It's a Martin Luther quote. It's got to be seized and grabbed by those that are oppressed. How does someone bring about change or get resolved to a challenge they're going through?
Yes. And so the thing I remind us, although it doesn't look like it, is that we have these protections. These protections already exist under the Ontario Human Rights Code, the Canadian Human Rights Code, the Charter. The protections exist. We have to operationalize these protections. We have to be more aware of what is already existing that we can jump on. So there are existing policies, harassment, discrimination policies in your workplace. The majority of workplaces will have that. Read it, understand it. And if there are gaps in there that you don't understand, then you bring that forward to your management to say, so you said A, B, and C, but it doesn't go to D. So where the gaps exist in. The other piece is that there is a legal support center through the Ontario Human Rights Commission. I have referred many people over there to say, you don't necessarily have to bring a complaint forward, but you can call somebody there and then you can navigate, you know, what your options are. So you want to know what your options are, right? No organization, at the end of the day, the reputational risk to an organization to not respond, to not take action is huge. We've seen that. We've seen how that has played out with the larger, you know, organization, the larger agencies, right? And so it's important that we understand what our rights are. We have to do that, and that we document things in that, you know, we don't kind of just let things go blasé. Document everything. You had a conversation with your supervisor about a concern with, team, the person who's sitting next to you, or whoever, you know, your manager. You document every single conversation around how, because you want to show your own due diligence. Here's what I've done. So the protections already exist. And if that means that you get the golden parachute out, then you have recourse. Like, there are existing systems for recourse, but there are policies in place. You know, I say escalate if you need to, and have those conversations, because we've had to sit silent for a long time for fear of, this is my bread and butter. I have kids to feed. I need a roof over my head. So therefore, I'm not going to speak up. But you know, this is, and I agree with whoever said we need to seize this. We need to seize this opportunity, that this is not okay, that we've done this for too long, that we're not doing that, and that our children will not have to do that. And that is my why. That is my why for doing this work. That is my why for my passion, is that I have little ones. I don't want a world for them to go in a space where they have to minimize their Blackness, or they have to minimize their maleness, you know, for them to fit in a space that was not built for them. And so that's why I challenge people to go beyond the DEI, go beyond EDI, because it's like, how do we create belonging? How do you invite people to say, this table, it wasn't built for us. Let's crush it out. Let's break it out and toss it out, but come together so we can rebuild the table, come together so that we can put equal seats at the table. And then I want to hear your voice. So when you talk about the leadership in folks of where there's one of us or two of us, and then we're at the table, we can be at the table. That doesn't mean we have a voice. If we don't have a voice, we're not effecting any change.
Absolutely.
Right?
I'll tell you this, man, you've hit so many nuggets, and I would love to go so deep on so many of these topics. We're going to have to bring you back. But I want to do one quick pivot because you actually referenced something on mentorship. And the reality, BBPA is doing quite a bit of programs. They're actually launching one right now. I think it's really key. Francis de Saul is executive director of the BBPA. Can you give a quick comment on that for me, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to say to Allison that we actually have quite a robust mentorship program. And as I listen to you, I think, and the president is on the call, but I think we want to bring you in because we probably need to extend it, to the executive level, so it can be more inclusive. But I think with your expertise, with somebody like you, I'm going to lean on you again more than I did Lynn today, to ask you to probably seek your expertise. And Anthony's right, we need you back, because I was on a panel with you recently, and I heard you talk about the fact that we ought not to be responsible for this problem. We didn't create it. I think that in itself is something that we could spend a whole hour talking about again. And I'd like to get your thoughts on it, but no, we don't necessarily have the time today. So for sure, we'll need you back. We'll call you back and talk more to you. This has been more than interesting.
Good stuff. I'm happy, and I'll be happy to come back. Absolutely. It's just, when you start to talk about it and unpack it, it's so much, right? It's so much. We can go so many spaces with it, but I always say, let's think about, how we develop each other, because that is important. Because I think if we get to a place where, we recognize that we have every right to be here as any other race, any other racialized person, we have every right to be there. And so the denial of our existence, the dismissing or minimizing of our existence, shouldn't even, we push beyond that, and we seize the moments, because we don't exist within the trauma of our history. We don't exist within the trauma of our history. We were kings and queens and business people who were stolen, who were taken, and who were brought here. And so we didn't create the problem. We're trying to fix it, but we have to remember it is not our problem. So when people say, we're gonna do this and so on, no, you do it because it's the right thing to do. You're not doing it because we created a problem that you're thinking that you're doing as a favor of trying to fix. This is your work to do. This is to fix your society. This is to fix your polite Canada that is ingrained and entrenched in the business and the profit of slavery.
Wow. You know what we need right now? In America, you see this. That's just talking. Just drop the mic.
I want a mic. I just want to drop the mic now.
This is absolutely phenomenal. I cannot go into the depths of what you shared. And I thank you for it. You know what? Truly, you are a leader within the community. You bring insight, you bring knowledge, you bring expertise. You are someone that is espoused. And I'm so looking forward to not only the success you have right now, but where you're going to be. We need more with those mindsets, because there's many within our community that have risen to leadership levels, but they have leadership levels of the status quo, and they don't recognize their own history. They don't recognize the context. They don't lean back. They don't push forward. And you have broken the mold. I thank you for it. We for sure are going to have you back. You're phenomenal.
Thank you.
For those that came, what a program. It was filled with knowledge, insights, and perspectives. The key lessons out of here is get involved, not only from a workplace, what you see, get involved with conversations from a political level, from a personal level. Speak to your family, speak to your friends, understand and hold accountable. Look for actionable items. Wow, I can go on and on, but this is phenomenal. We're running out of time though. So again, we thank you for coming out today. This is a Level Up program brought to you by the BBPA. Our next program, this is one of a series of programs. On Saturday, we have what is called our community space at 10 o'clock a.m. And we're partnering with colleges and university, and to help educate our young adults and youth, and those youth at heart, and helping them to understand the key pieces of what needs to make change, economic change. So we're having some of those partners teach on economics and math and marketing and accounting. So Saturday morning, 10 o'clock to 11:30, please come out to that one. Next Tuesday, we have a program we also have a Level Up program. Level Up program, we're starting a new series, a 4-part series called The Art of Negotiation, where we're going to be sitting down there and use experiential and also other forms of knowledge to teach you the art of negotiating. The next week's series is going to be based upon the initiation, the encounters with the stakeholders. So we're going to work on case studies. We're going to sit down there. The whole process, what we're doing here, we're supporting our community. We're educating our community. We're transforming our community. In the evening, next Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock p.m., we have the Boss Woman program, which is an entrepreneurial training program for women at women-led businesses. So please come out, continue to support, continue to spread the word, and continue to share. Open the knowledge. Our time is now. Our future is now. We need to embrace and work together. Wow, what a program. I'm so excited about what happened today. I'm excited because oftentimes when I went to school in the States, I lived in the States, and you hear it a lot down here in Canada, not so much. Our experience as our history is either seen as that of slavery, or we live in huts in Africa. So to hear someone that actually expounds and understands, and we can disseminate as a community coming together. And all those that are there, this is what the Ask a Professional series is, where we can come together and talk and discuss the key issues that matter to us most. So I thank you all for coming. I thank you for participating. I thank you for sharing your knowledge, your thoughts, and your insights. Allison, I can't tell you how many comments of people are loving you in the commentary section. I can't read them all, but there's a whole heap. There's a whole heap.
Absolutely.
We appreciate you. We appreciate you.
Anton, I just want to interject, Anton, and say next Wednesday, Ask a Professional is a day in the life of PepsiCo. So we'll have a panel from PepsiCo, and they will speak to us about what it's like to live the life of PepsiCo, of people who are working at PepsiCo. So
next Wednesday at 12 o'clock. You heard it here first. PepsiCo, day in the life of PepsiCo.
Remember my president, she always have a nice final word.
Oh, is Madam Nadine Spencer, please, by all means, we'd be remiss not to let her say a word. Miss Nadine Spencer.
Michael, you're kind. Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Allison, you remembered we met at the Junior of Toronto, and I'm so very proud and inspired, and continue to be proud and inspired by your lessons. We definitely have to have you back. I think we have to build a program where Allison is going to lead that program. Michael, our treasurer, don't you agree? Because these are lessons that we need to hear.
Most definitely.
Yeah. These are things that we need to hear. And as part of our growth and as part of our education of the broader community, especially that society, which we haven't made those rules. You're so on point with that. Lots has to be done. And I thank you so very much for your time and your inspiration, your motivation, and your knowledge, your exceptional superior knowledge. And we look forward to welcoming you back. And to all the attendees, this is what we're here to do at the BBPA, is to bring individuals like this, fantastic Black leaders like this, to show us that, it's possible for all of us. And we need to continue learning. We need to continue learning and having a dialogue. So thank you very much. And Anton, merci beaucoup. Thank you so much for excellent job. And to everyone, we'll see you next week. Thank you so much. Merci.
Thank you. And never forget, we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. Never forget that. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes.
Take care.
Thank you, Allison.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.